So one other thing that is potentially important with this is that if you are familiar with the custom G-code protocol system from Lightburn, that is the only option that is in MillMage. MillMage only supports machines that can take G-code input. Now, that's primarily because that's really all that most CNCs ever use, but also this is just sort of a start, and the vast majority of CNC machines will use this. The custom G-code system, as opposed to the way that we did things with Lightburn, where you have very distinct different protocols that you use, is meant for maximum flexibility because CNCs are very different and varied machines that have all sorts of different requirements of how they work, and everyone does it a little bit differently. So we try to handle that as much as possible. So in the device settings, you'll see this custom G-code tab. And this may seem a little bit daunting at first, but it's not as bad as it seems. The first thing that you're going to see is what we call your G-code blocks. The way that custom G-code works is sort of somewhere between what we had with the fixed Lightburn protocols of a very fixed way of outputting things that you have almost no control over, and a full post-processor, which is something you would see from a very high-end CAM tool. Now, we don't have a full post-processor that lets you completely and entirely customize everything you want, but that's because we generally don't need it for what we're trying to do here. This allows you to specify for each of any of these different types of outputs what gets emitted in terms of the G-code, as well as variables that could get output with each of those. So it starts with some very basic stuff. How do you home? Now, if you notice, these are sort of grayed out until you click on them. This basically just means that right now this is set to what the default is. Now, maybe your machine requires G28 to home, and in this one it's G28X, or sorry, X. So you can do that, and that's what it will emit for the homing commands. Although I'm going to clear this back out. As you can see, it sets an example for each of them. Now, you can, for example, on connect, maybe you want to pause for 10 seconds for some reason. You can add that. There's an on connect block for that. There are start and end scripts. So this is, at the start of the job, at the end of the job. You can put anything that you want in there. Tool on. Maybe yours has some different command for that. Tool off. Tool change. So right now it defaults to emitting T and then the tool number. That's it. But you could instead do G53, G0, Z1. So that's go up to the top, basically. And then G53X 100, Y 100. Maybe that's at the front of your machine. That's presenting the tool. You can then do something like this where you actually do @P. This is a pause command. And this is like sort of when you're streaming a single job with any tool change. And you can then put in text, such as, please insert tool, and then you can say tool name. So this will actually pop up a dialog, and you can see here, you're going to get a message. Please insert tool to flute 1/8 inch end mill. And then you can go back and do whatever you would like after that. Say, for example, do another dwell for 4 seconds to let the tool get up to speed, whatever you would like. So that's sort of the way that works. There's a lot of other options in here, air on, dwell, coolant on, coolant off, vacuum on, vacuum off. You can set those however you would like. And actually for these, you'll notice, so like coolant and vacuum don't get enabled unless you say that you have those. What you want to do at the very start and end of each operation. This is at the op level, not the job level. You can specify what's a cut move, what's a rapid move. And as you'll notice, like in this case, there is, X. You'll see this weird notation where it's X, X, Y, Y. The thing in the square brackets is the actual axis that you're emitting, so the X value. The fact that it's in square brackets basically tells it if this variable value hasn't changed, don't emit it at all. So like if I tell it to move internally, the job is told to move Y in 10 millimeters and nothing else has changed, it will only emit G1 Y10. That's it. Or, whatever the absolute position is or something like that. And you have it for all of these axes. So it will only emit the things that are necessary. The curly braces are where you have to put variables, and the square brackets are just telling it that it's optional. You can remove the square brackets if you always want to emit everything. And then there's a bunch of other examples in here. So this is extremely and highly configurable. You can manage as much as you want or not in there. In general, these should just work for the flavors that we've provided, but you can customize them all that you want for your specific machine. Then on the right-hand side, there are the custom G-code options. So these are just sort of a single place for a lot of things that have anything to do with this type of setup. You can specify what your flavor is again, and if you change these, it will actually update these values to whatever our defaults are for those. Specify, we're using seconds or milliseconds for dwell. You can specify, what are your comment characters? So I want to use open and close parens instead of semicolon. You can tell it don't output comments. For verbose output, it changes a little bit of the way that it outputs things in terms of G0, G1. You can specify what your default file extension is. So if you use a thing that uses NGC as the default, it will default to that. Save to single file will bypass the export dialog. It will just always save everything to one file. For tool management, so do I want to output tool changes? Do I have an automatic tool changer? So that will bypass a lot of other things, or whether or not you have a tool length probe. You can say, I have a manual start and stop on the spindle, which will handle things differently in terms of whether or not it assumes that it can automatically turn the spindle on for you. I showed vacuum and coolant before, and then you can also set things like, stop the vacuum, stop the coolant, and finally there's this fetch configuration on connect. That's just something that doesn't work with every system, but we try to fetch what the configuration is so that we can have MillMage be as informed as possible. So that's the basics of custom G-code and how you can set up those blocks. As I noted, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of options here. There's also a lot of space to get yourself in trouble. So if you're not super familiar with G-code, definitely ask someone who is, or, ask on the forums and reach out. And we can definitely help you there and make sure you've gotten everything set up the way you need it.